And of course, immediately run into issues with audio. Haha. Well, I guess I might be streaming without the game audio today. Can't have things be too easy, right?
Is there any way to update the vehicles in the exhibition, or do I need to just take it off and re-put it back on?
Well, it's interesting because when you have the build, like the blueprint posted for the first time, it'll say something like build successfully posted, and then it will give you the option to, like, there's like hold X to edit or something. And I haven't tried that before, but I'm wondering if that actually lets you re-upload it. And if not, otherwise what the purpose of it is. Like, it might just be like changing the name or tags or something, I don't know. If that is still an option, it would probably be available by going to the exhibition and then clicking like on the build with Y, because that's normally the like more options button, you know. Man, this is not playing nice. Come on. Whatever. At least my stuff's booting, so it's not like I can really speed that up. Okay. Well, and mind you too, like, it's going to be the same thing as I kind of said on the Reddit, which is like a lot of the building strategies are going to be based off of preference by, you know, a user's specific strategy and experience and skill level and whatnot.
Okay.
So this is primarily going to be like a how I would look at building, you know, X build with Y parts and whatnot, rather than like a definitive this would be the best way to build them or anything. Likewise, are you still sticking with shotguns?
Still sticking with them? I don't think I ever said I will stick with them.
No?
I'm using autocannons.
Okay. Alright, my bad. I thought it was one of the builds, but we get like a dozen builds posted a week, so evidently I was thinking of another one.
So you do this often?
I mean, not generally. Like, I've thrown out the offer a few times. I think you're probably the second or third person to take me up on it. Obviously, I find it easier to offer feedback in, like, the voice format.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's not going to be universal for everybody. That's going to be easiest for them, especially with, you know, time zones and platforms and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Crossout is struggling here all of a sudden. I'm just like in a connecting loop on the splash screen. So I'm wondering if I'm maybe not getting that great
As
server
in a
issues
loop, does
now.
it like tell you it's an error and tell you to click again, or does it not even do anything?
Like, nothing's happened so far. It's just hit connecting for a while, and it ended up basically like freezing up the Xbox app because I'm streaming it to PC to stream it to YouTube.
Okay.
So I don't know what that's about.
So do you use like an Elgato or something like that? A capture card?
No, I'm not nearly as fancy or like wanting to spend money on stuff. So it's just straight up like there's a Xbox app for PC that lets you stream the Xbox to it. So you can like theoretically use that to play from different rooms if an Xbox is set up or whatnot. But what I just do is I use that to then capture the screen, and then I use OBS to do that. So it's realistically not like the best system. Likewise, there's a couple of PC games I've tried streaming, but the PC can't really handle having the game open and streaming it. So it's the sort of thing where I'd look at, I'm like been trying to look at doing like a PC to PC streaming setup, but that hasn't been done yet either. So
Oh, okay.
whole lot of eventually TMs, you know, but that's also, you know, potentially part of the issue too, is me just trying to stream from Xbox to PC over wireless and then stream from PC to YouTube wireless. But it hasn't typically been problematic. Like I've done tons of, I don't know, my channel is horrendously disorganized, but I've done tons of videos on like Crossout or even other games like Gloomhaven without really much connection issues. Most of the issues we do have is from like peer-to-peer rather than from one of my devices to the other, you know?
Yeah, I don't really see any reason for there to be a problem. Seems like pretty independent process to stream both of those things from Xbox to PC and then from PC to YouTube. I wouldn't imagine there to be any problem.
Yeah, well, you'd hope not. Okay, it looks like it's connecting. So I guess the trick was just to restart the game like 3 times, obviously. Just
Yeah,
as the
that
devs
usually
intended.
works.
Mind you, of course, in theory, if I were like a PC gamer, it would be like a lot easier too, because I could just theoretically go from from the device to online, right? But okay, so I have the build in front of me. I see you are making use of the Gleam of the North paint. Is it? Oh, Ice Crystal.
Oh, you already like typed in my username, yeah?
Well, it's actually pretty easy if you're, so like I don't know how much you care for recursion, but I do have the stream like up, so you could go to the channel, I could send you a link if that's easier, and then you could see what I'm seeing, but of course you'll have a slight delay.
Actually,
and then
yeah,
of
that would
course,
be perfect. I could do that.
okay. Do you want the link, or are you able to just search Bronze Break YouTube easy enough?
Oh, yeah, I'll probably just type it in. It's gonna be better.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, me doing is just the same thing, but having me search it instead of you, so. But, yeah, I mean, depending on how far you scroll back, you'll even see it in the stream, but in the exhibition, they have an ability to sort by new. So if you have somebody who's uploading a build for you to check with, then I found that that's easiest, is like, because I can see your old and your new build, because they're 2 of the 8 most recently uploaded builds, you know?
Oh, okay. Oh, even delay isn't that bad.
Yeah, it's a lot more problematic for like gameplay than anything, but for just going over stuff, I think it's straightforward enough. So it's kind of funny too, of course, because I don't have some of the modules anymore, but like hashing them out should be easy enough. So I see that you pretty much got like most of the obvious tips from people talking about like embedding, protecting the modules, and then having the like weapons lower down and protected by bumpers, right?
Yeah, if you go back to the first one, to the old one, so the problem with that one, the reason I changed it is because one of the tip was to use what do they call it? Like shot through, you know, the material where it
Yeah.
just goes through.
Yeah, damage pass-through parts, gun mounts, yeah.
Yeah, that one. So I used those because I was like, oh, people recommend them, so I used it. So it doesn't break that quickly.
Right.
And then I realized it just makes the whole build worse because it uses so much power score. I could have so many more parts for the same durability as for those two gun mounts. And also it makes the guns a lot higher and easier to shoot down. So I made it lower, and then I added a lot of protection over it, like the bumpers in the front. So that was a very good decision because now they're a lot harder to take down. My angles aren't that good because I can't shoot someone that's really close to me, but that's not a real problem because I'm long range anyway. I'm pretty fast, so I could just get away from them. And also, the thing I did was, you don't really see it here at all, but you know what, the way I have those scavenger parts, like the huge walls on the side? First of all, I used a lot of small walls instead of the whole big one, because I heard that it's better to have many small pieces than one big piece. And then additionally, under those walls, because that's the second layer you see right there.
Yeah.
The first layer is made out of bumpers and those kind of spikes. If you look at the parts list, you know the like very high damage spikes people put in the front of their cars.
Yeah.
You see, it's at the bottom of their list, 4 out of 4. I used those as protection because they're really strong and really light. So I don't know if that was a good idea, but it seems to me if you divide the durability by the power score and by the what else is there, by the mass, it turns out really good. A lot better than other protective parts. So I don't know is that a good way to do it, but I used it instead of damaging others, I used it basically as protection for myself.
Right. Yeah, so the first thing that kind of strikes me is that you're saying that you can't really aim down. It looks like that's mostly an issue with the placement of your guns in the like forward backward configuration where they have a really like shallow angle between them. So you have them 5-6 pips apart, but the second one's only one higher. So if you like move that down one, it would probably be easier to shoot. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, I'm aware that I can't shoot right in front of the car, and that's just, I just have to get over that because I would have to rebuild the whole thing because I can't really put it down lower as on the engine. So just have to move the entire engine, and the engine's a pretty good place right there because I can't get shot from the front really because the engine's actually tougher than the cabin itself. So I find that as a good place to put the gun, and it's not really a problem as I'm usually facing to my side or just angled. I don't really face them directly, I just try not to, and it works.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, it's definitely the sort of thing where, like you said, the actual gameplay of it is going to affect. No, Bandit, you're being rude. Is going to affect it, and the fact that it's a sniper weapon, like you said, you don't generally need to shoot right in front of you. I think it is something that's valuable to keep as an option just because it obviously gives you more flexibility, and I don't really think it'd be too difficult to adapt it, to be honest. Just need to figure out how I'm going to actually do this with blueprint slots because I think I have a couple of slots available online. I can throw mine up. Got still about a half hour here, which looks like it should be okay. Okay, so I will just get rid of one of my builds. And then throw up one I'm not really using at the moment. Then I will delete mine.
And also on the newer one, I didn't put it right up to the edge of the 4,700 PS score, like people recommend it to, because I'm waiting to get the APC wheels, if I remember that one correctly, because I'm changing those wheels for the APC wheels, and that's why I have a little bit of space there left until it gets to the 4,700.
Gotcha. Well, that's actually great because I have APC wheels, because I can do a mock-up easy enough for it. So I have this download then. Of course, I don't have the medium wheel, so it's going to replace that. And I don't have the storms. So I'll put in a placeholder. The sinus should be around the same size and dimensions. Except, of course, we're over energy, so... Oh, maybe not. Why does it get angry at me then? It's just the angles again. Yeah, so something like fixing that, I think, is probably straightforward enough. Like you did mention, obviously it's directly on your engine, and your engine is pretty tanky. So, not that I necessarily suggest this 100% of the time, but it should be easy enough for you to just simply sink the Colossus into the frames and then attach wheels by like skinnier frame parts on the side, which you already kind of have going on here. So again, this is based off of like personal experience and like preference and playstyle and whatnot. So this is obviously going to be extremely biased towards what I found working for me. And certainly I haven't been at this power score for a very long time. So it's not to say that it's, you know, like necessarily objectively true or anything. But if it works for you, I'll just kind of go around and like sort of poke at the different aspects of the build and sort of how I do them, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's okay.
So to begin with, a important distinction to make is between a vehicle's durability and the total durability, or you could call it cabin durability and vehicle durability. So any durability granted by the cabin itself, so in my case it has a fusion, it's not a plus durability fusion, so this build and your build would still have the same 230 base durability. But if you have a cabin that has the durability fusion, although I don't honestly know which ones do, because most of my fusions are just pre-given by events. Yeah, so for instance, my cohort is fused for durability, so it has 670 durability points by default, and then anytime you add armor, that value is also multiplied. But otherwise, it's generally very much what you see is what you get for builds. So your vehicle cabin durability, which is that number that's at the, you know, the bottom of the screen when you go into battle, that's going to be the sum of your cabin durability, which in this case is 230 to begin with the growl, and then all of the other structural parts. So if you go into the build mode, that's going to be everything under the structural tab. I know some people prefer to just have like the entire scroll list. I don't, because I find it gets really jumbled and lengthy really quickly. But in any case, anything under the structural list is going to add durability equivalent to whatever the green number is in the text, or the, you know, the shield icon X amount of points at the bottom. So for instance, it has 917 durability currently. If I throw on something that has 15 durability, then it goes up to 932 durability. So the 15 points go directly to that number. So that makes sense, right? But it's essentially making your cabin durability, the amount of damage you can take before dying, higher. So now I throw some parts on, it's up to 1070, it's a bit tankier. Your other durability type is going to be basically every other category. So like all of your weapons, all of your hardware, all of your movement parts, your decor, and even your frames in the quote-unquote cabin tab. All of those are going to contribute to the overall vehicle durability. So you don't actually see that number changing unless you hover over the durability stat. But that means that, for instance, if I slap on a bunch of really large, heavy parts, so for instance, this says that this has 96 durability, and that has a damage pass-through of 90%, which means, you know, effectively it has 10 times the health, you know, under ideal circumstances. But if I throw a bunch of these down, that doesn't actually increase the durability of the cabin at all. it's only going to be the total vehicle health. So the difference between that is the total vehicle health is basically the maximum amount of damage your build can theoretically absorb at, you know, ideal circumstances. So if somebody took like hit scan weapons with no splash damage and shot every single one of your parts off, then that's the amount of damage they'd have to deal. But most of the time, that's not how you die. People aren't generally stripping you one piece at a time while you're laying on the ground, you know? So yeah. The cabin durability, that bar at the bottom, is generally what is sort of restricting your you know, your life, because once they either blow off enough structural parts or, you know, damage your cabin, that much damage in general, then, you know, you're dead, and then, you know, the match is over for you. So to that end, the parts that you're using as armor that are bumpers, for instance, those are generally pretty tough small pieces, which means they are great for protecting weapons, but they aren't contributing to your overall vehicle durability. So while, for instance, it can be clever to use the Colossus as armor, as you did, at the same time, when they blow that off, it's not actually reducing your vehicle's durability, so it can protect you, quote unquote, a little bit longer than the value implies. So right now, if we go and take 917 damage, the build dies, right? But that's only if it's dealt directly to the cabin. If somebody deals the 300 damage to the Colossus, and assuming we don't have other parts get blown off because they're attached that way, then we still have 917 cabin durability. So that's really useful if you can get them to destroy those parts first, which seems like it should be the case since you have the Colossus directly in front of your build. It should be soaking damage first, as well as the bumpers. But what it also means is, because those don't contribute to the cabin's durability, if somebody gets behind you, for instance, then they can theoretically... Well, I guess you actually have some bumpers hidden there, so maybe a bad example, but if they hit you from the side, then they can theoretically chew through just these 2-3 parts, so the half wall, the hatchets, and then just damage the cabin and then blow you up a lot more easily, if that makes sense. So yeah. There's generally a trade-off for using non-structural parts as armor, which is to say that it does protect you on paper better from certain angles, but it doesn't contribute to the overall vehicle durability, which means that you end up being weaker from others. So overall, for the sake of like the power score that you're at, it would probably be worthwhile to look at sort of, I don't think there's a technical term for it, but I guess you could say condensing or narrowing the different tiers you're using. So for instance, you have, well, I mean, like you said, you did want to replace them, but like you have white tier movement parts. So although you said, you know, maybe you'd replace those with APC, and I can actually just throw a few on here. So say something like that. And then I think I was still missing the couple more breeze modules, was it? Yeah. And then the AC50 storms being 4 energy. So the actual power score mockup would probably be...
Well, I did just quick calculations, and it doesn't reach the 4,700 anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so it looks like if I replace them with the APC and then sort of pseudo do the breezes, it does hit that threshold, but that's also because I don't actually have breezes and their power score is significantly less. Man, I don't know why the app is like dying today. Anyway, yeah, so generally, like, I'd suggest keeping those parameters pretty narrow. So of course, using the cyan wheels is obviously going to be a bit better than using things like the breeze. Like you said, there is definitely power score trade-offs for certain things, especially using the melee parts as armor as well. Generally, what's what I found useful is trying to keep all of your modules within about 2 tiers of each other. So right now, like I said, this is just my mock-up, so it doesn't actually have the proper energy expenditure of it, and I don't have the 2 additional breezes, for instance. But right now you have a multitude of white parts, and then you have a few cyan, you have a few blue, you have a few epic as well. So what I found is that generally if you wanted like a more tight cohesive build, having the parts all about within a range of 2 with each other is normally where I aim for. So that doesn't apply to things like paints or stickers, where of course the tier doesn't apply in any way, shape or form to the power score, and it also doesn't apply to the like unique modules like the fuel barrel, the fuel tank, or the radio, because you only have the option of those tier parts, right? There's no like reason to not use a radio or to not use a fuel barrel and a fuel tank together if you have the power score to spare, assuming you don't have like higher tier things like the radar to get rid of them. So to that end, I would probably say it might actually be worthwhile to look at shaving off a bunch of power score simply by not running a generator at this point, because if you do that and you take off your 2 breezes, you're still going to have room for a radiator and a cooler, and you're going to be saving on about 400 power score just like by that. Now that's not to say, of course, that you can't look at in the future. Wow, did the app just die again? Probably
well,
what's paused on the stream, right?
Yeah, right now it did. It says the network quality is a problem, so that's why maybe it just lagged. Oh, but your mouse is working, so I'm guessing it's just the app, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. I mean, like, I am running last gen console. It is the X, so it's the highest tier of the last gen. But obviously, it's not to say it doesn't have its issues, especially with everything going on in the world right now. Yeah, see, it's not even showing up on the list right now, which is wild, because of course I still have it open on the other side. Being so cool. That's weird. I haven't had issues with it before. Oh, it looks like the Xbox just disconnected from the network. That would do it. Okay, well, it says it's back. And then, of course, the audio tends to get jacked up whenever it gets restarted. Yeah, lovely. Even if it goes back to being silent, that'll be better, honestly. Okay.
I have the volume off anyway, so I don't hear anything.
That's fair, yeah. Well, it's being, like, it's cutting in and out a lot, too, which is pretty annoying, but at least as long as my, like, voice is going through on it, fine. And then obviously you're in the party as well, so that makes it a little bit more direct, too. But what I was getting at is I probably look at running just a single heater and cooler. You can look at adding more things, you know, the more weapons, running a generator, more modules, and upgrading other stuff, especially like your cabin, as you know, get more, build more wealth and have more items available in the game. But
well, I don't think I need to update it. From what I noticed, like a lot of my posts, people keep saying that the Growl is a very good cabin, and people use it even up to 10k PS, or even like around 8k PS. Definitely, that people still use Growl. So I don't know. I'll need to upgrade that anytime soon.
That's fair. Oh, that's not good.
I think your stream's off now.
Yeah, it does not look very good on my end. The screen is displaying super weird, so I'm wondering if that's an issue with the screen or an issue with the computer, and if so, if that's something that's going to go away on a reboot.
That's exactly why I don't use PCs, and I rather stick with consoles.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot larger margin for error with it, right? Okay, well, it looks like it's fixed now. The stream says it's still going, but obviously it cut out to black there for a bit, right?
Yep.
Okay. Looks like maybe the console companion is just really struggling today for some reason or another. Because, like, I turned the monitor off and then back on, and then the issues went away. Yeah, so the Growl definitely has a lot of value because of its 11 energy, which is the second highest in the game for, you know, the default tier. The highest you can get is 12 energy, which is for epic and up. Medium and light cabins, and 11 energy is actually only as high as the heavy cabins go currently. Even the legendary tiers are only 11 energy. So to that end, and that's something I spoke about a bit in the post as well, which is to say that the reason why it's so popular is for the ridiculously low power score of 750 for having 11 energy, because if you're comparing to other epic or legendary cabins of having 11 or maybe one more energy for double to triple the power score, it's kind of a no-brainer if you're trying to keep your power score as low as possible, right?
Yeah.
That being said, it's definitely still frowned upon to take high-level stuff into low levels just by using the Growl. So, for instance, like the examples of the 10,000 power score is people running the highest tier weaponry. So, running stuff like relics or legendaries in the lower power scores. So, it's not infrequent. Like, I haven't been down there for a while, but at least when I was down at 5,000-6,000 power score, it wasn't infrequent where you'd see somebody running a Growl and then 2 porcupines. So, they aren't even using all 11 energy, maybe, but just using the power score, you know, getting that as low as possible so they can kind of sneak in the higher tier stuff. So, that's generally frowned upon with the label of seal clubbing. So you probably saw there's a post yesterday or a couple days ago by somebody talking about somebody doing similar by bringing the Duster and a single Punisher in at like 2,500 power score or something. So not to say it's not a valid strategy, certainly, but it can be at times just frowned upon because generally it's using an item that seems unbalanced to sort of exploit the power score system. Now, of course, whether or not you actually want to use it or stick with it or have it for other uses or whatnot is entirely a you decision. It's definitely a very strong cabin for what it is, especially for the power score. But at the same time, unless you're wanting to stay down in these lower power scores and you're not wanting to use the epic movement parts or generators or weapons, you're probably going to want to end up using an epic cabin anyway, because not only do you get the benefits of higher stats, but you are also going to get perks that can help your gameplay. So for instance, for something like sniping, especially for how cheap it is currently, going from the Growl to something like the Ghost, assuming you're using a chameleon, is really the same cost as going to just the next tier of a special cabin. And while you do have a significant bump in power score, you do have, I think it's something like, yeah, double the available mass limit. You're going to have a perk as well that's going to be able to increase your damage by a significant amount. But to what degree you want to look at doing and progressing and stuff like that is, like I said, it's going to be a completely you decision to sort of figure out. But as far as the build itself for staying cohesive, I generally recommend staying away from like mixing white and epic movement parts where feasible, because it feels like the only way you're able to really get around that right now is because you're able to use the Growl as kind of a clutch in that respect, you know.
Well, that is actually very interesting, if I could interrupt you there, because
for
the
sure.
first thing you said, I was actually going to say that it's a weird tactic to me, because from what I noticed, people actually are doing better when they take out, like, even worse cabin than me, like the Sprinter, which is gray colored, I think. And people use that with just an epic gun or two, and they destroy actually most of the lobby with just some medium wheels, gray parts, just a Sprinter cabin, and then an epic gun. And it seems to me that's a good tactic, actually.
Yeah, so and then of course the game crashed. Well, like I said too, when I was kind of alluding to it earlier with the, like, that would be generally what would be considered seal clubbing. So while it's not it's not wrong in general to look at the power score system, of course, and try and say, okay, how can I, kind of maximize for this? But it goes back to the earlier point I kind of made when you're kind of focusing being as effective at a specific power score as possible, or being as good at destroying others as possible. It can sort of be a forest for the trees thing, if you're familiar with the expression, where you're kind of making your own gameplay experience maybe less interesting and making the experience for opponents worse for the sake of winning more frequently. And again, this is my opinion, and of course other people are going to see it differently and whatnot. Like, while I don't think it's wrong to say, okay, how can I make a build better and be more effective and be more successful with it, it's the same thing too, where having been on the sides of, like, even loading into matches where the power score is unfair in my favor and stuff like that, it's like I'd rather have a match with a close loss than have a match with me absolutely destroying, getting like 6 kills because the enemies were basically all AFK or whatever, right? So there's definitely a sort of meta game there of meta being like another box around the main gameplay rather than meta as in explicitly following the meta. So same word, different usage here. But there's sort of a meta game around that where you're not only thinking, okay, how can I optimize my power score as much as possible, but also how can I optimize my optimization as much as possible? And that can certainly be interesting in its own right. But normally, like I said, it's frowned upon if you're sort of using systems to like almost an exploiting edge to just be more effective at the game. So again, that's something I can't really answer for you to what degree you want to use it, because of course it's going to be a spectrum. It's not going to be pure black and white, but you're going to have to kind of make that decision on how much you want to lean into or against it. Either way, I don't really have a whole lot of experience building builds for that, so I'm not going to be able to really offer advice as far as how you end up being more effective at it, just because I don't have that that knowledge, that experience. So most of what I'm looking at when looking at this build is sort of the things like being able to differentiate between cabin and total vehicle durability, or what sort of modules you want to support things, and then being able to sort of extrapolate that to any other build you do on the subject, rather than explicitly this is how you'd make this hyper optimized, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it.
So most of what, and I mean, mind you, we are rubbing up pretty close to that time, so I'll try and hurry this up. Or I mean, of course, like you said, we can always talk again later, tomorrow or whatnot on the subject. But mostly what I was kind of thinking of going over was just sort of the foundational stuff here, rather than any specific, like I said, suggestions for the build. So, for instance, something as easy as just syncing the Colossus engine.
If you had like put into bullet points. So what do we have here? You want me to get more things like closer in tiers, so they're like the same tier altogether, even better if they had all the same tier. And you want me to, not really want me, but you told me exactly how the cabin durability works and the difference between the other durability. So I get that, and I'll try to incorporate that into my build. What else is there to know?
So you just kind of want the like quick and dirty rundown on what I'd look at changing, rather than my explicit notes for how I change it, yeah? Just for the sake of time then?
Well, I thought you don't have much left to talk about, but if you do, go ahead. I have time.
Mean, it's
just like we can always do it a different day. Continue.
It's completely dependent on how much time you want to spend on this, because it's the sort of thing where I'd probably, just having the experience in the game, would probably have ideas for most aspects of it, and then it would be kind of up to you to decide, okay, well, knowing the knowledge of, for instance, the things like the power score, or keeping modules close together, or cabin perks, or total durability, vehicle durability, once you know those systems, kind of deciding for yourself how much you want to, like I said, lean into or away from them, right? So if you want, I can kind of continue just talking at the same pace, and then wherever we end today, we end, and then I can pick it up tomorrow or another day, or I can kind of just give you like the quick and dirty things I'd look at considering for this build.
You can continue the way you're doing it now. I'd like a detailed version.
For sure. Well, and absolutely, you know, too, like you said, because I mean, this was obviously fairly late in your day when I said I was available, and then I had to push it back another hour anyway. So it's the sort of thing too, where, you know, at any point you need to go or whatever, feel free to, of course, let me know, because otherwise, as you may have seen with my videos, I can ramble on for a while about stuff. So, yeah, the most immediate thing that I was thinking was just basically increasing the firing arc of your weapons. So I wonder if this would almost be easy if I just bought a couple of storms, but probably not, because they're used in the battle pass, so I don't feel like I'm going to be getting them for very cheap. Let's see. I'll just use, this is going to be the wrong power score, but these weapons perform similarly and are the same energy cost, so I will see if I can run them instead, just for the sake of sort of describing what I'm trying to. Oh, the mesh almost fits. Alright, so if I have the adapters as an example, so this is very much the same behavior you're getting currently, where you can't aim down all the way. So while you said you're not terribly worried about something like that for the sake of sniping, there is definitely valid concerns when you start looking at things like terrain, or if you get wedged, because if you're even at a slight tilt, you're going to have issues dealing with somebody directly in front of you, unless, like you said,
especially from uphill, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, so I think the bridge map is probably the best example of that, where it's kind of like this, where you don't really have a whole lot of flat areas unless you kind of like straddle hills. So it would be really difficult shooting people in the trenches unless you try to like position your build sideways, right? So the front gun obviously is going to have quite a few issues as a result of that, just because of this bumper being in the way and preventing it from looking down. But we could very easily, in my eyes at least, make it so that your top gun has at least the same amount of gun depression, because right now that's the major issue in my eyes, is it's basically your second gun is being blocked off by your first gun. So what I probably look at doing, so assuming you remove the PU1 charge, maybe you don't, and if you don't, you might want to consider running the lighter generator, the Ampere, because even though there is a much higher explosion risk with it, it is a lot smaller and compact, which is not really a bad thing when you're dealing with a light cabin of this size. You obviously don't have a whole lot of room or mass to play around with generally. But let's say, theoretically, if you do decide to get rid of it, then you do have a bunch more room underneath for modules now. And you can pull some of your other things back, like your breeze, or maybe you replace it with a Tamir or something like that. So if you do that, then you can get rid of some of the frames. So it's been spoken about before, the concept of redundant frames. Is that kind of what you were going with this? With having,
what
like,
do you
the
mean by
layered
that?
frames? Okay, so
As in
generally
using a lot of small ones instead of a huge one?
kind of. It is a part of that. So, for instance, when you have a wheel attached to a frame, I'm just going to throw a build over here just for an example. When you throw a wheel to a frame, if you end up having that frame get shot off, of course, what ends up happening is that wheel ends up getting destroyed as well, right? Now,
Yeah, so I put them, try to attach the wheel to 2 frames at a time.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have them on multiple frames, then if one is shot off, generally the other can, you know, hopefully still support it. And while if I do an example like this where you just have them all, why is it not copying? Wow, whatever. So if you had something
I
like...
could have done this one better, except I don't have that many frames.
Yeah, and that's fair. And this is sort of me talking about the concept of it rather than an explicit like suggestion to begin with. But like if you have something like this and say you have your cabin in the middle, then in theory, if you lose either of these frames, your wheels are still connected, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you lose the cabin, you're dead anyway, so it doesn't matter that these aren't connected to anything. But another concern is if you actually have the cabin supported by just one frame. So for instance, while you do kind of have redundant frames here, insofar as if this one gets shot off, there's still the other one connecting the wheels, and it is convenient that most wheels have 2 connection pips, which makes it a lot easier, of course, to attach it to multiple frames. You could also, this is just an aside, this isn't necessarily part of the discussion, but some of the other higher tier parts have a lot of connection pips. So for instance, you can see all of the pips buried in the tank track here, or something like the auger. So they have a lot of possible frames that you can connect them to, which makes it a little bit easier, because obviously with wheels, since you only have 2 connection pips, in order to have them connected to 2 frames, you have to have them centered on the 2 different frames. And if you have it on a build like this where it's not a power of 2, you can find that there's sometimes some awkward positioning required in order to actually hit all of those frames. But the issue with this specific example is because all of the frames are effectively attached to the cabin by the same route. For instance, if you lose that frame, you still lose those. So a alternative way of doing that, of course, is not only being able to pull it forward so that both frames are attached. That way if you lose, oops, bad example. That way if you lose either, the other is still attached and thus your wheels. But you can also look at doing smaller frames. So for instance, if I have 2 2x6s, then if you lose one frame, the other's still attached, obviously. And if you have more frames afterwards, like for instance for a forward pair of wheels, then you can still lose one of these middle frames without it impacting the forward one. Whereas if you still just had a single frame here, then if you lose that, then you lose the front, right? So I think that's kind of what it looks like you were doing here, is you were having multiple smaller frames, right?
Yeah.
So this is the potential disadvantage of that. So while, like I said, it makes sense for the sake of, okay, if I'm only going to lose one frame, I want to lose a half frame so that I don't lose the other wheel. Likewise, maybe you want to do, you know, 2x6s all the way across, so I can lose, you know, a few on either side, or I can lose a front one and lose a wheel, but then not lose the other wheel or anything like that. The disadvantage is, as you probably have noticed, frame durability is pretty consistent, where 2 parts of one smaller size will be the same durability as 1 part of a larger size. So for instance, a 6x4 frame will have 42 health, and 2x6s will have 21 health. So when you add these 2 together, for their power score, their durability, their mass, they end up being the same as the 6x4 frame. But because of the way damage pass-through works, having 2 ones side by side can actually be a disadvantage. The reason for that being is based on how the damage pass-through function works to begin with. So are you familiar with how it works? I know you mentioned that, like, people were mentioning they're useful for parts like for, you know, letting damage through, but
not really. I think it's very complicated. It just passes the bullets through onto the next piece. So I'm guessing if you have 2 of them in a row, if one doesn't catch it, then the other one will, and that's why it's worse.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So it's just, it lets part of the damage through. So you can see on the gun mounts, the buggy floors, those are all 90% damage pass-through parts, which means that if you shoot and there is damage that's taking that can go through. Some damage types don't go through damage pass-through parts, but and some go through all parts as if they were damage pass-through parts, but you don't really need to worry about that for the like stage of the game you're at. That's where you're talking like basically relics. Other than, you know, people bringing them into the low tier where you might have to deal with them then. But in any case, that's their point. So while they have a relatively low durability value to begin with, so while 38 isn't particularly high if you look at compared to some of the scavenger parts of the same size. So for instance, a half wall has twice as much durability as this thing while only being 1/3 as high. But as a result of the damage pass-through, when you shoot it for, say, 100 damage, it doesn't take 100 damage. It takes 10 damage, and 90% of that damage is passed through it. So, for instance, I'm not actually sure how much damage a adapter deals, so we can test that right now. And of course my version, because of the adapters have this little bulky part at the end, it doesn't actually let them aim up very high on this build either, but normally less of an issue with your build because you're actually running the storms. So for instance, if I shoot at the damage testing orb with 2 of them, deals 82 damage per burst. So I know that if I shoot at this, in theory it should take the 8.2 damage, however it rounds it, probably 8 damage, and then the rest of the damage will pass through. So for instance, if I put a part that is fairly low durability but pretty large, let's say minivan panel, that's enormous. So this part only has 64 durability, which means that one burst would shoot it off. The gun mount, as you saw, or as you're aware, lets damage through. So while this says it has 38 durability, it effectively has 380 durability. So for instance, if I just attach this onto the build, and then find an angle where the weapons aren't blocked, you can be shooting at this for quite a while before that gun mount actually pops off, right?
Yep.
But it ended up blowing off the parts behind it. So likewise, the same thing with this. If I have a damaged pass-through part, so this rather tanky part, which is, like you said, the one that people suggested you mount your weapons on, and then I have a weak part behind it, then I can theoretically just shoot once, the gun mount will take a little bit of damage, and then that minivan panel will be completely shut off. And as a result, the gun mount pops off as well. So
yeah, that's why I've been told if I want to do something like that, unmount the guns on a gun mount or any pass-through object, to mount that object onto the cabin and not onto other pieces.
yeah, exactly. So it's about basically getting the full use out of them, right? So for instance, if I throw this up on a tower, so in this example, I'm not going to have any parts behind the gun mount, and it's just going to be space, right? Gotta find an angle again. Then these can soak a really high amount of damage, right? They're only taking 8 from each volley. So other than when I shoot the same one over and over with both guns, and it's taking the 8 damage, 8 damage, 8 damage, 8 damage, then it hits, you know, the 42, whatever the math ends up being on that, and then it falls off. It can theoretically prevent a lot of damage from happening, but just like you said, if you have parts behind it, they'll take the damage. So the way that the system actually works, and this is why you'll hear about space armor a lot, is from the point of contact on the mesh till I believe it's 7 blocks behind it, damage will pass through, and then after that it's just ignored, because otherwise you'd have to like line trace the damage indefinitely, and that can be pretty difficult for a system to handle. So if you don't have anything behind the block for 7 pips from where it contacts, in theory you won't take any damage. So if we were to make a super basic spaced armor version of your build, and we slapped
That's
on...
okay. You don't have to show me this one because I watched the entire video about the space armor.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so you're familiar with it then. Yeah. So that's exactly why they were saying not to have it on, like, connected to weak parts, and why you'd want to attach it to the cabin. But as a result of that, the fact that you can take only 1/10 of the damage on the part, and then potentially parts behind it don't take anything, that's the reason why there's such high power score, because of the ability to use that to basically mitigate 90% of damage until that part's destroyed, right? So that's why they have really high power score, and especially as you notice when you're only at the, you know, the sub 4500, the sub 5000 power score anyway, adding multiple parts of 133 is a lot. And then of course, you know, there's also the consideration that, for instance, the gun mount specifically, or the buggy floor parts, they're actually really large, so you might not have even the space to put them on your builds, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, this console companion is not doing me any good today.
Well, I think we could leave it off here anyway.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll just finish what I was speaking of, which is the point of the parts, the frame parts. So as a result of that and the damage passing through, I found that personally, rather than having multiple like smaller frame parts, having a few larger ones tends to be more effective. But then you can still get the frame redundancy by offsetting them in a way that the frames are supporting the wheels in multiple places. So, well, here I suppose I could, assuming it plays nice. Right. So for instance, when you have the triple stack of 1x4 frames here, each of these are actually pretty at risk for getting shot off. And if somebody theoretically shoots from the side, they could theoretically destroy all of them in only a couple of shots, just because not only are they low durability from, you know, the actual physical number attached to them, but when you have multiple of them, they're basically hitting all of these parts at the same time. So while yes, it only takes 1/10 of the damage of something, if somebody's dealing 100 damage, then this part gets blown off after 2 shots. But not only that part, any of the potential ones behind it. So what I found useful is definitely having a cavity for modules underneath is certainly something I can recommend. So I wouldn't necessarily say worry about getting rid of that, for instance, unless we can maybe tuck some more modules down there. But instead of having the multiple smaller parts, you can look at maybe running a larger, and if you have the mass for it, you can run the regulars, otherwise you can run the lightweight frames. Running the larger parts. So while this has 36 durability rather than your 3 different ones of, you know, 12, because of the damage pass through, they'd be hitting all 3 of the ones earlier. So it's as, you know, strong as the weakest member. Whereas this way they would have to do the full 36 damage to it to knock it off. And of course you can do likewise on the other side as well.
Okay.
But you can still maintain the redundant points of the mounting. So for instance, I'm going to move up your back frames a little bit, just so that they're touching on the back of the cabin. And likewise, you can pretty much do the same thing too with this back one. So instead of having the 4 2x8s, the 4 2x4s, you could run 2 of the 4x4s, or you could even run a single one of the 8x4s. Because it's not terribly unreasonable that people might try to shoot your butt, and for the sake of it being, this is really the only place it's connected to the cabin with frames currently, although of course you can throw some more on the front if you're not using this cavity. I would probably say you could probably get away with having 2 here. And then you can put some other frames wrapping around, and then you can disperse those wheels as you see fit. So for instance, you could even theoretically pull these ones back some more, add another 2x8, and then distribute these on, you know, sort of the gap points of it.
Yeah.
Where you have the frame redundancy, or you could use smaller pieces so that they're spaced out a little bit more evenly. So for instance, maybe run a 2x4 there, a 2x8 there. Actually, I'll swap it back to the 6. And then have a 2x8 up here or something. Then that way you could have each of these connected to 2 frames, and you could have it spaced out maybe a little bit better. Again, that's really going to depend on like how you want to have things. I found that generally having the non-steering wheel at the center of mass and then having the steering wheels on the outside makes turning a little bit sharper. So normally I want the spacing to be uniform, so I might actually change this back to 2x6s, and then have the part that's connected to the frame at the back maybe sort of a hidden one in the center. But that'll probably be something for you to play around with, especially, you know, if you want to have more armor or stuff on the back here, you'll probably want to spread out the wheels some more. So maybe you'll end up going back to having the 2x8s on the side instead, something like that. But in any case, the point being that if anybody's going to shoot off a frame on any particular side of your build, they'd have to go through at the very least the, say, 21 damage of the 2x6, and then you'd still have redundancy the other way around. Whereas when you have the multiple smaller layers, there's the real risk of somebody just chewing through all of those rather quickly.
Okay.
So that's an example of how the frames might work. Like I said, maybe you want to fill this area on the front with like larger frames because you don't want a cavity there. So you could have really durable front frames, or maybe you want to spread them out instead and have a little bit longer of the build so you can armor on the back a little bit more or something like that. But that's just sort of how I approach using frames in any case. It's having like the largest, fewest amount possible while still having redundancy where I'm not worried about, you know, if one frame pops, me losing a wheel, or maybe even two if you were to use like a 2x8 on this one side. And it's not like you're doing this anyway, but in theory, if you had something like this, then of course, if somebody pops that one frame, then you lose two wheels immediately, regardless of what other, you know, other redundant frames you have for the rest of the build.
Yeah.
So if that is time for you today, then I don't expect you to go and do a full rebuild today or anything, but there's a couple of ideas, and then like I said, there'll be a few other things I can like talk about tomorrow or any other time you're free as well.
Yeah, I'll see how it goes. Maybe I do have time, maybe I don't. I'll let you know. If we're both online at the same time, I'll just let you know if you have time, and we can do like that.
Yeah, well, do you not have a planned time where you'd be on tomorrow?
Well, I do, but I don't know what my friends are doing, and I think they want to do something on Minecraft.
Okay, sounds good. Well, you can just shoot me, like, I'll be available around the same time tomorrow, so you can just shoot me a message and we can, like, go through the build a little bit more afterwards if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be perfect, if I have time.
For sure. Well, the great thing about Crossout really is there's no real rush. Like you said, if you found the build works for you, you can just basically keep using it, and then I can just kind of keep giving you ideas like throughout when you're available. It's not like there's any time crunch for it, right?
Yeah, no, I have a lot of time. That's what I like about this game. Like, I could just keep driving the same car and slowly upgrading it. I'm not even in a rush to get the APC wheels. Like, the whole point about this game is just the time to get there, not even to build the whole car straight away. So
Yeah.
like, I'm just waiting until I could just buy them right now, but I don't even want to do this. I'll just wait until I get every part crafted. So there's absolutely no rush in this game.
Yeah, and that's I think a really nice part of it. It's not like Ark or a survival game where you might log off for the night and then when you log on all your stuff's gone, right?
Yeah.
So the grind is certainly something that people are, they don't like about the game a lot, but it does also give you ample opportunity to spend the time actually looking and testing and trying different things and, like you said, iterating on them and seeing what works for you, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, I will let you go, but I will maybe catch you around then.
Yeah, thank you for the help, and I'll see you